Recently, the YouTube channel Harmful Opinions offered a brief but pointed mention of the channel Dead Domain, whose creator is a slightly reoccurring, though consistently unimpressive, presence that I have had the misfortune of addressing in at least 2 of my videos.
Meet my god!
And though Tim's coverage of Dead Domain's hit piece on Brianna Wu was limited at length, Tim at least touched on topics that have circulated within certain circles but have not yet reached a broader span of attention.
I think Dead Domain has 1 or 2 real problems with Brianna, one of them definitely being support for Israel.
What's all this about Israel? Well, in an age defined by limited memory, short attention spans, and surface-level engagement, it is no surprise that many are still asking what exactly is going on. And while I won't lay everything out in long-form detail, I will point you all in the right direction, particularly if you are curious about why Dead Domain continues to inspire more eye rolls than insights. Why trans game developer Brianna Wu is such a controversial figure, written by Emily Chuddy, November 22, 2024. Trans game developer and former political hopeful Brianna Wu has become a controversial figure in recent months, and had claimed to be one of social media website Blue Sky's most blocked users. The video game developer and journalist hit the headlines during the 2014 Gamergate scandal, a misogynistic online harassment campaign that targeted women in the video game industry. The video game developer and journalist hit the headlines during the 2014 Gamergate scandal, a misogynistic online harassment campaign that targeted women in the video game industry. Wu, who founded the independent game studio giant Space Cat, revealed the doxing and threats she'd faced. 4 years later, she unsuccessfully ran for Congress in Massachusetts. She campaigned again briefly in 2020 before dropping out when the COVID-19 pandemic struck. In recent months, however, she has become embroiled in controversy over her views on the transgender community. Wu herself is trans. And the conflict in Gaza leading to campaigns to have her blocked on social media. But who exactly is Brianna Wu? And why has she become so controversial? In 2018, Wu lost out in the Democratic primaries as she tried to unseat the incumbent Stephen F. Lynch. After the election, she said ahead she wanted to become a congresswoman to improve issues such as health care, women's reproductive rights, the cost of childcare, and gun safety laws. "I think female anger is a huge part of why we're at this moment," she told Vox. "Women are interconnected and talking to each other like never before. White women are talking with women of color. Cis women are talking with transgender women. Disabled women are talking to able-bodied women. But the other side of that coin is harassers are also organized like never before. People who hate women are organized like never before. And these forces that don't want to hear from us are organized like never before. It makes the stakes higher on both sides." Wu stood again in 2020, endorsing the Green New Deal for renewable energy, but dropped out of the primaries in April, citing the impact that lockdowns had on in-person campaigning. Over the past few months, Wu has supported trans rights, but also made anti-trans statements pretty much in the same breath. She has used transphobic language and slurs, describing herself as a silly Billy in a tweet. She has also previously dismissed the acronym LGBTQIA+ as identity politics, saying, "Queer means nothing, and asexuals are not queer." While Wu has voiced support for gender-affirming healthcare and proclaimed that she was not going to stop fighting for trans youngsters affected by anti-LGBTQ+ laws, she had opposed the idea of self-ID and said some trans people should not be allowed to access female spaces. Self-ID in the women's bathroom or locker room? Hell no. Natal males who are part of the non-binary social project in there? Also, hell no, she wrote on Twitter/X. But to muddy the waters further, she has spoken out against J.K. Rowling. And after a trans toilet ban was mandated in the lower house of Congress earlier this week, Wu said trans women on a medical pathway, diagnosed by a professional, And on powerful drugs that inhibit erections, we are a threat to no one. However, she then railed against some other trans people using women's toilets and misgendered them. Wu has been criticized by a number of high-profile people within the trans community, including civil rights lawyer Alejandra Caraballo, who accused her of wanting to police the entire community. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's estranged daughter, Vivian Jenna Wilson, claimed that Wu was trying to rationalize bigotry after the game developer said the biggest obstacle to trans healthcare wasn't Republicans, but lunatic trans activists, adding that the trans community had become an extremist movement. Writing on Threads, Wilson said, "Trans grifters like Brianna are a dime a dozen, and they're all equally interchangeable, and just kinda sad. I've never seen a group of people brag about hating themselves so brazenly." Wu is now the executive director of the Rebellion PAC, which claims to fight for the working class, gender equality, and LGBTQ+ rights. I fear that progressivism has become the very thing we fought against. My fellow leftists are betraying our Jewish allies. Written by Brianna Wu, updated September 9, 2024. My progressive fever started breaking on October 7, 2023. I knew something was wrong with the left when feminists I knew personally, people who had fought alongside me for abortion access, were dismissing a video of a terrified young woman taken prisoner by Hamas, being dragged from the back of a Jeep at gunpoint, her pelvic area covered in blood, as not nope and legitimate resistance. I watched people who had worked with me on social media harassment policy cheer as terrorists and paragliders slaughtered civilians at the Supernova Festival, and I saw propaganda machines start to spin up and rebrand the perpetrators of October 7 as the victims of October 7. Many people know my name because of the Gamergate harassment campaign in the video game industry a decade ago. Women asking for better treatment in an infamously sexist industry were targeted with threats of nope and/or death. The perpetrators used the web to unleash mob resentment and allow people to become the worst version of themselves. Analysts say this playbook was adopted by the fringe right and became a factor in Donald Trump's 2016 presidential race. In the past 10 years, I've moved into the public policy realm. While my job is to help progressives win elections, I've become more and more concerned about the people I'm standing next to. Watching Democratic town halls change policies so non-binary people could take delegate slots reserved for women raised questions. But did it really matter? Watching Linda Sarsour and others align the Women's March with anti-Semitic agitator Louis Farrakhan was disturbing. But was it disturbing enough to compromise a coalition fighting for women's rights? And as Black Lives Matter protests turned violent and buildings started to burn, I asked myself if I should be speaking up about it. Was it racist to say that setting buildings on fire was deplorable? There's a term for the problem with progressivism, the purity spiral. Leftists have no mechanism to hit the brakes on bad ideas, so they continue drifting leftward. What starts as a good cause, such as looking at police violence targeting black communities, continues to move further and further to the fringe, where supporters begin to advocate the defunding of all police. Today, we are at the terminal stage of the worst ideas. No conflict demonstrates the toxic horror that progressivism has become more than the Israel-Hamas war. There's no kind way to say it. Many progressives have betrayed our Jewish friends and neighbors, many of whom stood with us in defeating the 2018 anti-trans bathroom ballot initiative, elevating Black Lives Matter, and donning knitted pink hats to stand for women's rights. In my experience, every time progressives asked for help with canvassing, donating, or phone backing, Jewish friends on the left showed up in disproportionate numbers. Their mistake was thinking that progressives would be there for them. There was a character test, and we on the left failed it. The friends that had stood with us every step of the way got the message. Jews don't count. I had not read deeply into the history of Israel before October 7. I remembered that the Oslo Peace Accords Israel signed in 1993 with Yasser Arafat and the PLO had failed, and I occasionally noticed stories in recent decades about Israel being hit with Hamas rocket attacks. But in general, I accepted what progressive leaders said, that Palestinians were under occupation and their lands had been stolen by Israel. Watching my progressive friends cheerlead the October 7 atrocities introduced doubts I couldn't look past. I felt an ethical responsibility to read much more deeply about the conflict. What I learned made me angry. The entire progressive storyline was built on a selective interpretation of highly contested history, facts tailored to mislead, and a propaganda campaign to falsely accuse the people who endured the actual Holocaust of unleashing a new one. The story that Israel was the violent aggressor could not be more wrong. The reason for the violence wasn't Israel. It was a political project to destroy Israel. If I had been so incredibly wrong on the Israel and Palestinian territories, what else was I wrong about? I still believed in progressive policies like addressing racial injustice, strength through diplomacy, and universal health care. But was I working with people who wanted to build something better, or people who wanted to set it all on fire? The casual anti-Semitism I'd looked past in progressive spaces became impossible to ignore. I started asking questions in meetings with fellow progressives when they suggested members of Hamas were heroes. What happens to the 7 million Jews in Israel if Hamas succeeds? How does this end in anything but a second Holocaust? The answers I got inevitably lapsed into a predictable pattern, revisiting a misleading and inaccurate history that reframes terrorists as heroes. Can progressivism be saved from here? I just don't know. I've watched young progressives insist that the theocratic government of Iran is noble, and our own government is evil. Honest debate is stifled as people are shamed into agreeing with deceptive claims. Too many progressives seem deeply unserious about shaping public policy, or even engaging with those who disagree with them. Watching Vice President Kamala Harris' presidential nomination acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention filled me with worry. She acknowledged Israel's right to defend itself while condemning the humanitarian crisis Palestinian civilians are facing. That policy and the empathy she expressed are obviously correct, but her words are plainly tailored to placate the protesters who spent all week trying to disrupt our convention. Shouldn't we expect our party's standard bearer to acknowledge the pain being felt by Jewish communities? Perhaps even stand with them? These same forces are disrupting the Democratic Party in Massachusetts as well. I have Jewish friends who are reluctant to attend their local Democratic town halls, alienated by the casual anti-Semitism and dismissal of their voices. At some point, if the Democratic Party truly stands for inclusion, we have to acknowledge the bigots sitting beside us. I fear that progressivism has become the ideological mirror image of the Gamergate mob I fought a decade ago. It is the darkest possible fate. We have become the very thing we fought against, the worst version of ourselves. Gamergate troll Brianna Wu denounces progressives. Posted on April 5th, 2024 by The Comic Crow. It has been a very welcome fall from grace for Brianna Wu, who rose to popularity over her bad faith critiques of the Gamergate movement. Now the very same progressives who she has pandered to for nearly all of her time in the spotlight for her stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Video games have always seemed to be a vehicle for Brianna to pursue her political goals. After a middling career as a political activist and fundraiser, she formed her own gaming studio and released Revolution 60, which was filled with her feminist ideology. With mixed reviews and no creative streak to speak of, Brianna then retreated to podcasting, only for that to fall flat. And only a couple of years later, she returned to politics with a failed 2018 congressional bid. It's almost admirable that someone who has constantly failed throughout their life has a never-give-up attitude. In 2020, she co-founded Rebellion PAC with Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. For many years, Brianna has focused her time, effort, and focus on pushing a progressive narrative and bolstering support and votes for progressive candidates. The left always eats its own is a saying that has played out time and again over the past decade, and now Brianna is experiencing it firsthand. Only a couple of weeks back, Brianna called out an ex-user who had compiled a list of transphobes and placed her name onto it. Brianna would state their vehement support for trans people, even including the controversial act of transitioning minors. None of this saved them from being labeled a transphobe, of course, and perhaps that was Brianna's wake-up call that progressive ideologies were going too far. Hey, quick question. I am for minors transitioning, for adults transitioning. I've talked at length about the need for trans civil rights to be a Democratic Party priority. I was one of the people that helped the Leela Alcorn story go national. I've hired trans people, done ads encouraging trans civil rights to pass, spoken at LGBT conferences on trans issues. For trans sex work, I support non-binary people. I have a position on trans equality that would be considered extreme by most America. Do you think that by including me for not having the absolute maximum view on trans issues, you are watering down the term and making it harder to call out serious transphobes? That said, what seems to have finally gotten the once progressive ally, who spent years pushing for progressive politicians and policies to denounce the movements, seems to be the Israel-Palestine conflict that is going on. After an X account claimed Brianna was supportive of Israel because she was seeking money from the AIPAC, because she was seeking money from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, an American-Israeli political group, Brianna would clap back, pointing out how many people claiming to be progressive have happily and repeatedly been calling for the end of Israel and for them to be bombed, as well as criticizing the way progressives act towards their political opposition, and labeling anyone who speaks to them a traitor. Finishing up by stating that progressives have been pushing stupider and stupider policies, and how one cannot even call out the atrocity's new design of the pride flag without being labeled as a bigot. Lol, so what's this all about? Pivoting for these AIPAC dollars. Brianna Wu. For me, supporting Israel has had a very direct effect. I had planned to run for Congress again once Lynch retires. Everything I've been doing in my career is setting up for that. But my base of support are progressives, and they hate me for speaking out. It is literally the work of 6 years gone. But I have to be true to myself and what I believe. You want to have a real discussion about why I don't plan to run for office again? It has nothing to do with the AIPAC or money. It is because I am not convinced progressivism is a force for good in American politics anymore. Right now, you're in New York chanting "Bomb Tel Aviv" and siding with the actual theocratic terrorists. It is because you cannot run a civil rights movement by telling everyone who disagrees with you to shut up. It is because talking to Republicans is seen as betrayal, something you have to do in a democracy. It is because you cannot form a coalition to do anything because no one is interested in getting along with anyone. It is because the policies we are advocating are getting stupider and stupider, and no one can say so. It is because the movement is a panopticon police state, where you cannot say anything out of step with the extreme where you get devoured by cannibals hoping for clout. You cannot even say hideous flag design is not good, because your DMs will fill with angry people. That literally happened yesterday. My politics have not changed. My appraisal of who has been able to get the public policy I believe in passed has. This is a cultural dead end. I'm going to work with the Democrats who can act like adults. Many progressive accounts, including the one she responded to, would then confirm they absolutely want to see the Tel Aviv bomb and are chanting for it in their home states. She'd also highlight that some of the people cheering on the hate mob of progressives, riled up to go after her, have been celebrating the terror attacks since they occurred. This is genuinely so funny this Zionist public figure is making up anti-miscegenation to be mad at now. Brianna Wu responds. Here's what this watermelon emoji was tweeting on October 7th. Bro is calling people who are acting in self-defense because they have no other options terrorists, while claiming his own military is acting in self-defense. The same military that has neo-Nazi imagery on their bodies and their uniforms. And when pointing out how these same people were grossly misinformed about the conflict, she'd have a myriad of responses calling her a Jew, a liar, or both. Brianna Wu says, Free Palestine people continue to be the most actively malicious people to try to talk to, accusing me of spreading misinformation while having no idea that Al-Shifa Hospital and the WCK disaster are two separate incidents. He thinks this because someone malicious cropped a screenshot for a dunk, obscuring the source I was citing. It's honestly libelous. Oh wait, Brianna Wu is white. She definitely uses that Chinese last name as a cover. Wu is her husband's surname. Nearly 4 in 5 American women take the surname of their husband after marriage. None of this is to say Brianna has suddenly turned away from her politics or principles. She has simply begun to call out the excesses of the left and how crazy their tactics and policy decisions have become, citing the shrinking tiny minority of progressives within the United States and how cutting out the crazy would help the movement grow and thrive. Even so, Brianna has become excommunicado among the progressive movement for not falling in line, and it is likely they will ignore her warnings, which is probably for the best. Brianna Wu says progressives are 6% of the electorate and shrinking. About 22% are normie Democrats. Fastest growing electorate are independents, about 42%. Maybe the future of progressive public policy is dropping the crazy and working on public policy those independents will support. And now, reconsider Dead Domain's hit piece on Brianna Wu with all of this context and ask yourself, why would someone like Dead Domain be so invested in rewriting history?
Meet my God.
I'm sure you can work with that.
Meet my God. You don't scare me. You are scared of me. You are worried about me. And you should be. I am going to continue haunting your dreams, you worthless piece of mother. If you think I'm going anywhere, I'm only gonna get worse. If you think I'm gonna stop making things that offend you and piss you off, you have no idea how deviant and degenerate things can get. If you think people like me are going away, that we're gonna stop making your art and your movies and ruining the things you love, you have no idea. We will take everything from you because it was never yours to begin with.
When a figure like Brianna Wu, who was once at least nominally aligned with progressive ideals, begins to call out the unhinged tactics and increasingly untenable policies of the modern left, it does indeed raise uncomfortable questions. Questions that for some are better buried than answered. After all, if certain excesses have become so toxic that even former allies are sounding the alarm, it becomes necessary, at least for the true ideologues, to silence that dissent. But not too loudly, of course. Better to take someone down quietly, subtly, without drawing attention to the fact that the message, not just the messenger, is what is being targeted. For the more fervent progressive types, including the ones who think it's somehow revolutionary to decorate their bedrooms with satanic paraphernalia, any suggestion of purging the movement's more unbalanced elements in the name of survival is heresy. And like all heresies, it must be extinguished without mercy.